You've been doing everything right. And somehow, that's exactly the problem. You kept your word when others didn't. You waited your turn when others pushed to the front. You stayed honest in rooms full of people who weren't even trying to be. You did the work nobody asked you to do, held yourself to standards nobody else seemed to care about. And for a long time, you believed it would matter. That eventually the effort would show. That integrity compounds. That life, if you live it correctly, eventually balances out. But lately something has shifted, and you feel it. Not loudly, not in a way you can easily explain to someone else, just quietly, in the background. Like a question you don't want to ask out loud because you're not sure you're ready for the answer. Because the people cutting corners, they're moving. The ones playing politics, managing perception, bending the rules just enough without breaking them, they're getting the rooms, the opportunities, the recognition you thought playing fair would eventually earn you. And instead of questioning that, instead of sitting with how deeply unfair that actually is, you did something that made complete sense at the time. You tightened up. You worked harder, stayed later, raised your own standards even higher because surely doing things the right way still has to count for something. If you just stay consistent enough, patient enough, good enough, the world will eventually catch up. But here's what nobody said to you directly. That tightening, that quiet doubling down, it's exhausting you. It's building a resentment underneath the surface that you rarely let yourself fully admit, and it's slowly trapping you inside a rule book that exists almost entirely inside your own head, one that the people moving past you never agreed to follow in the first place. And the worst part isn't that life is unfair. You already knew that somewhere deep down. The worst part is what unfairness did to you. It didn't make you angry. It made you rigid. And rigidity, when it hardens around your values, stops feeling like strength. It starts feeling like a prison you built yourself and called it character. Here's what psychology actually shows us about this pattern. When your brain perceives repeated unfairness, it doesn't just feel bad. It registers as a threat to your identity. Who you are is tied to how you operate. So when the world doesn't reward how you operate, your mind interprets that as an attack, not just on your strategy, but on you. And your response to that threat is control. You can't control them, you can't control the system, so you over-control yourself. You perform your goodness harder, more visibly. You become almost aggressively principled, not because it's working, but because backing down feels like admitting they were right, like becoming the very thing you've been quietly judging. That's not integrity anymore. That's fear in a very convincing disguise. Stop. Because here's what I'm not saying, and I need you to hear this clearly. I'm not telling you the cynics had it all along. I'm not saying nothing matters, everyone's corrupt, and you should go become someone you're not. That's not a solution. That's just a different trap with different walls. People who abandon their values chasing power don't find freedom. They find a hollowness they spend the rest of their lives trying to fill. What I'm actually telling you is something harder and more specific than that. The world was never going to reward you simply for being good. That was never the arrangement, even if someone somewhere told you it was. Fairness isn't a system built into reality. It's an aspiration, a direction. Sometimes the world moves toward it, often it doesn't. And waiting for fairness to find you, banking on it, building your entire strategy around the assumption that goodness gets repaid, that's not faith. That's magical thinking, and it's been costing you. The people who move well through an unfair world aren't the ones who threw away their values. They're the ones who stopped expecting their values to do all the strategic work for them. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Your integrity is a compass, not a strategy. A compass tells you which direction is true north. It doesn't negotiate the terrain. It doesn't read the room. It doesn't decide when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to push and when to wait. Who actually deserves your trust, and who's been borrowing it without earning it. You still have to do all of that, and doing that, moving deliberately, reading people accurately, understanding what actually motivates the world around you, none of that compromises who you are. It just means you finally decided to show up fully. Say this to yourself and mean it. Being naive is not the same as being good. The person who keeps extending trust that keeps getting broken isn't more moral than someone who learns from the pattern. The person who refuses to see people as they actually are, who mistakes passivity for patience, who waits and calls it virtue, that person isn't living with more integrity. They're just less equipped. And the resentment that builds from years of that quiet, corrosive bitterness that you've been careful not to show, that's not righteousness. That's the price of a strategy that was never going to work, finally coming due. Here's what actually shifts when you let this land. You stop performing. You stop being good for an invisible audience, hoping somewhere, somehow the universe is keeping score, and one day it'll settle the account. That performance is exhausting. It requires you to constantly monitor yourself, constantly compare yourself to people who aren't even playing the same game, constantly measure your worth against outcomes you can't control. When you stop that, when you genuinely stop, something opens up. You start moving, not recklessly, not without your values, but with clear eyes and real strategy. You keep your integrity because it's who you actually are, not because you're owed something for it. You make hard, calculated choices without drowning in guilt, because strategy was never the enemy. You read the game clearly, the politics, the power, the unspoken rules without becoming the game. And the next time life is unfair to you, because it will be, more than once, probably more than you expect, you won't freeze inside the question of what's right. You already know what's right. That part was never the problem. You look at the situation with clear eyes, decide what you actually want, figure out the most effective path to it, and move. With your values intact, without the cage, without the resentment, without the exhausting performance of a goodness that was always meant to be lived, not displayed. That's not cynicism. That's not compromise. That's finally understanding the game well enough to win it, without losing yourself in the process. If something in this cracked open for you, if you felt that quiet recognition of something you've been carrying but couldn't name, share this with one person. You already know who they are. The one doing everything right and wondering why it isn't working yet. They need to hear this more than you did.